Hello and welcome to Cloudforest Vibes. My name's Bobby, and this is how I grow orchids and carnivorous plants. Hello and welcome to Cloudforest Vibes. Today I have a very special tour for you and update. This is going to be my entire Lepanthes collection. As you guys know, anybody who's watched this channel for a while, and any of you newcomers maybe, Lepanthes is my absolute favorite genus of orchid. I have a tank that's basically almost exclusively dedicated to them. I guess not quite anymore, it's about half and half, but I'd like to get back to the point where I can separate some of these cooler growing plants out of here into a space of their own and put this tank back to its original use, which is these orchids right here. I have a pretty nice assortment of them at this point in time. My collection has almost doubled this year, to be honest, so I'm thrilled about that. I have bloomed, I believe, every one of them at this point except for one, and we'll say two. No, it's three now. Three. I've bloomed them all except for three, I believe, at this point in time. And we actually do have quite a few in bloom right now. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to take a nice up close and personal look at each one of these plants today, have a chat about them, and hopefully you enjoy. So here is my Lepanthes update and tour. And I just hope you guys enjoy as much as I'm going to enjoy making this. So, love talking about these plants. Anyhow, here we go. This first plant here is Lepanthes Gargoyle. I've had this plant about 2 years, and it is getting to be a pretty good size. I am extremely thrilled with the progress I've gotten from this plant. It is absolutely a cakey machine. I don't know if you guys can see this or not, but let me zoom in a little bit more. It just absolutely loves to produce cakeys all over. It's got another one here. It's got more growing down here. The bloom spike from last year on this largest leaf here has actually turned into a cakey. So, why? Why is this a cakey machine? I believe that growing in the tank, although it has the absolute optimal humidity, I'm convinced of that. Most of these plants are extremely happy with that. It is not cool enough year-round. This plant is a very forgiving Lepanthes. You can grow this plant from cold to intermediate to warm. It likes shade, daily waterings, keep it moist. I do not water daily in the orchidarium, but it has a very closed environment. It is very conducive to holding its moisture. So I usually get away with every 3, 4, sometimes 5 days in the winter watering these plants. Having that said, I do not have a cooling system in there, so this one and 2 of the others do not do quite as well as they would do in a cooler environment, but they live in the wintertime. They're much happier. I did let this actually grow in the tent last winter, and that's when it produced its first blooms. So I am going to move this back over into the tent in about 3 weeks or so, sometime in October, and I'm going to do the same thing with 1 or maybe even 2 others, and just see if perhaps that is what it is, and I can get them to grow happier, at least in the wintertime in a cooler environment. Having that said, again, I did bloom this last year. It is a gorgeous bloom. I cannot wait to see it again. I know Lynn just got one of these. Lynn, this is definitely a intermediate, but I would say honestly a cooler intermediate grower. So if you can see this, it will tolerate intermediate conditions, even up to slightly warm, but this does not even get warm conditions, and it acts a bit funny. So intermediate to cool for sure for Lepanthes Gargoyle, for Lynn, and anybody else who grows this plant. And I do feed it the exact same as I would any other Lepanthes, low level, just like a Masdevallia, Restrepia, anything else like that. And I try to keep this as high humidity as I possibly can. In the tank it gets you know, usually around 90%. My humidity level is set at 89. My dehumidification setting comes on at 92% and takes it back down to about 86, 87, and it cycles throughout there. I'd never let this go below 86 or 85% humidity. In the tent, it will be about 86%, 85. In the winter, sometimes it'll drop down to around 80, but I never ever go below 80 in the tent either. So definitely above 80 to keep it happy, and intermediate to cool temps if you really, really want to have it shine. Alrighty. Our next plant, I'm just going to scooch over. Our next orchid is Lepanthes Dominguensis. This is another one. It has pushed on really well for me this season. I got this in the spring, and all the longer, taller growths that you see on it right now are actually my growths. They have done really, really well. It blooms. It's not as prolific a bloomer as, say, Telepagoniflora or Helicocephala yet, but it does bloom consistently. It's got spikes coming on most of its newest growths, and it is a charming bloom. I'll throw a picture up of that and Gargoyle if I haven't already. Great bloom. I do want to see it become a little bit more prolific, but it's grown lots of roots, lots of new growths. I grow this intermediate again. Everything in the tank I would consider it to be right at intermediate, and it grows very happy. So that is Dominguensis. Again, not a whole lot to talk about, but I will give it a little spin, and you guys can see exactly what's going on there. So, awesome little plant. Let's move on to another one. So, the Lepanthes next door, this is the one, the only Lepanthes Helicocephala, and it is growing like a weed. The two longest growths are definitely mine, followed by the one below that, or above that, I guess I should say here. This is one of those ones. This is a plant. It is one of the reasons that you buy Lepanthes. It is absolutely always, I mean always, smothered in blooms just like this. You don't need a magnifying glass to see them or a microscope to see them. They are abundant, they are prolific, and I even have one, this one on the left. It's actually throwing out triple blooms most of the time. This is throwing out doubles most of the time. I mean, it is absolutely an awesome little Lepanthes, and a showy one at that. I love it. I treat it again the same. All these plants get the exact same care as I mentioned for Lepanthes Gargoyle in the beginning, and it just grows really well. Its roots are growing really nicely, running right up the bark, all the way through the moss and everywhere. And it throws out a couple new growths every month. It's not as fast of a grower as some, but it definitely makes up for it again with the abundance of these awesome yellow and red blooms. I'll try to get you in a little bit closer. But yeah, that is Lepanthes Helicocephala, and that is absolutely one of my favorites. This is an intermediate to warm grower. It does just fine intermediate, and it is very, very easy to grow, provided you can keep the humidity up. This next plant is Lepanthes Hexapus. It is actually in bloom. You can see it, very small. There's one right there, and there is one right there. Now, this is one you might end up getting the magnifying glass out for. It's small, even for me, but it is such a detailed and nice little bloom. I cannot zoom in any closer from where I'm at right now, so I might have to just try to bring it closer for you. Hold on a minute. Like I said, virtually impossible to film. I'll snap a picture of it, but it's a delicate little translucent yellow and pink and orange flower. It's got little tendrils around it. It is a really nice little bloom, and they're very prolific. I don't know if you can tell this or not, but this thing is absolutely smothered in spikes at all times. I mean, this thing is almost constantly in bloom. So it's small, but it sure does pack a punch. And you can see the side profile of that flower. It does have a protruding lip. It's a very, very interesting and very different kind of Lepanthes. Really, really neat. That is Lepanthes Hexapus, and the foliage does have a bit of a pattern to it. Some veining, really nice one, really neat little plant. I do like it. Again, very small, but kind of quirky. It's got a lot of character, and it grows really well. I cannot complain at all, so hopefully it keeps doing what it's doing, and it's just a nice teeny little splash of color, and one you do actually kind of have to hunt for, so kind of makes it fun looking around and seeing all the other ones that are more prominent, and all of a sudden you get a surprise, or two, or three, or five. So that's Lepanthes Hexapus. And I will get the next one back up here, and we'll go ahead and scoot over and take a look. So this is Lepanthes Fimbriata, and I got this from Tarzan earlier this year, and it has absolutely grown on beautifully. I mounted this with the live moss. It is one of my favorite Lepanthes just for the mounts alone, and because, I mean, what you see is what you get. Some of them do tend to hide themselves a bit, but it's a nice splash of red and orange. It is nice, and it's floriferous. More often than not, it's got 5, 6, 7, 10 flowers on it, and it's just a nice surprise as you look through here. Again, nice little splash of color. Again, just about everything on it's a bloom. It's got some larger foliage. Again, it's not such a miniature. Grows in the intermediate conditions pretty nicely. I believe I was giving it too much sun. The leaves, the last batch of leaves, really came out. Let me see if I can find one here. Just like this. Very, very much cupped. They didn't open up fully, and I am blaming 100% the light. If for some reason that subsists, I will have to take this off the mount and make sure it still has a valid root system. It does take a lot of moisture to keep the moss going, and I'm hoping that the roots are doing okay on this plant, but I believe it is. Another nice one, and another one that's doing really well. The next plant is my Lepanthes Hexapus. This is an awesome plant. It's growing nicely. It's pushing out bigger and better blooms all the time. These are some of the largest blooms it's pushed out, and some of them are actually starting to present themselves on top of the leaves instead of on the underside like it was when it first came to me. Beautiful plant. Again, this plant and Mariposa has almost identical blooms, though these are much larger. The foliage on this plant is a lighter shade of green, and the underside is also a lighter shade of reddish purple. But this is one that's just about always in bloom. The blooms on this last a few days, and then there's typically one right behind it ready to open up. So I believe once this grows on a little bit more, hopefully next season it starts to expand and get a little bit larger, it will become more prolific and start blooming more like the Mariposa. Again, I grow this in intermediate conditions. I keep it moist. I let them dry very gently between waterings before I water again, but that is the only thing to them. High humidity and low feed levels. Our next Lepanthes is Lepanthes Mariposa. This plant has done stunningly well. It's grown many new growths for me since I put it on this little cork piece this spring. And this is another one, I will turn it over now, that is constantly in bloom. It's constantly putting on displays like this. It's got double and triple blooms on certain leaves. And again, the blooms are small, but they really are quite special. Like I said, small, but they do pack quite a punch. They do grow mainly on the underside of the leaves. The spikes get long enough to creep around the edge, so it is a visible bloom, but what they lack in visibility, again, they make up for in cuteness and in abundance. One of my favorite Lepanthes. It is a stunner and a star performer in my collection again, and that is Lepanthes Mariposa. Right here next door we have Lepanthes guatemalansis. Sorry, this is one of my newer Lepanthes. I got this not too long ago from Tarzan, smacked it on this piece of cork, and it has done well. It's put up 2 new growths, and it's got a third on the way here. It's got its first 2 flower spikes progressing for me. You can see them on my finger there. But no blooms yet. This was in bloom when I got it, but this is one of the ones I haven't managed to bloom yet. Although we are getting close, I think. It's starting to form its first bud. And again, it does seem like a pretty happy plant. It has done well since I've gotten it. Another one that I've struggled with just a little bit, let me back up, is Lepanthes Preciosa. Now, it's growing well. It's put up all these 4 new growths for me since I've gotten it, but it's been a real slow one to take off. It didn't have that many roots when it went on this piece of cork. And I think it's just a very, very, very young plant. It has bloomed a few times. The blooms are not quite what I thought they would be. So I'm waiting, I think, again. It's very immature. I think after another season or so, hopefully it'll start putting on a little bit larger foliage and getting to its adult size and put on its adult bloom, because it is a really special, really awesome, and supposedly really prolific blooming Lepanthes. The foliage is amazing. Very much like Caladium, but much smaller, at least so far. And I am excited to see it. It's going to be hopefully another nice splash of red in this orchidarium one day. That's Lepanthes Preciosa. Again, it's done pretty well, but it's only put on those 3 growths. So a little bit of root growth, and that is all we really have to talk about for that one. So this is Lepanthes Sherry Bridiham. This is a cross between the Lepanthes Caladium and Lepanthes Telepagoniflora. We did just miss a few blooms. It's kind of elusive. It only blooms for 1 day when the blooms open. This should be down here, its next bloom to open, followed by, I believe, this one. But again, it is rather elusive. If you don't catch it, you don't catch it. And this time around, I did not. It's grown lots of new growths for me. It's finally settled in. It was another one that was kind of slow to get adapted to my environment, but now that it is, I mean, it is really growing strong. All these leaves that you see here, back here, these are all new growths, and it does have a few more coming down at the base that you cannot see at this moment, but it's a nice one. And again, for a hybrid, you really can't get much better than putting the 2 best together, in my opinion. So having that said, speaking of the best, this is one of them. This is Lepanthes Caladium, and mine has absolutely taken off this year. I'm so thankful. It was in really bad shape when I got it 2 years ago. I got it from Equigenera. It was more than half dead. I mean, it was 80% dead. It dropped down to, I believe, 1 leaf at one point in time. I have slowly but surely nursed this thing back to health, and it just keeps on impressing. This has been my star performer this year. It has constantly been in bloom with these dainty little red flowers. They are constantly, I mean constantly, multiple blooms. It is always like this. It's a very healthy plant. The foliage, again, you cannot beat that. It is gorgeous even when it's not in bloom, which is rare. It's growing new growths all the time now. by the 2s, by the 3s. So hopefully by next year this is going to be well on its way to a specimen size, and it'll be just covered in these little red blooms all the time. I am so thrilled that I finally have a healthy version of this plant. I stuck in there with it. It took time again, but it came back. So that's Lepanthes Caladium, and it has been a really, really nice year. Next door again, everyone's favorite. This is Lepanthes Helicocephala. Now, my Lepanthes Helicocephala actually is slowing down. It's got a couple buds left to go from its last mass blooming, but a lot of the spikes that you see here are actually dying. It's getting a little bit cooler, and usually what that signals this plant to do, in my opinion, is start growing. It has recently pushed out some new growths, and it is just starting to get back into its cycle of growth. I'm going to go ahead through here and clean it up in the next few minutes, probably before I put it back. But it has been a really nice year with this plant. No real mass bloomings, but it has consistently bloomed on and off every month, and it has blown up again. It's getting really, really big. I'm excited. I think what I'll do probably is clean this plant up and allow room for these new growths that are now coming out all over the base to poke out, get their sun or light quickly, and develop into blooming sized growths, and pack this plant full of nice, awesome, healthy, active bloom spikes once again. So that's Lepanthes Helicocephala. Again, great year, even though we don't have any blooms to show off right now. Sometimes it does take a rest. Again, when it starts to get cooler, the blooms will slow down a bit. They will keep coming, but come January or February, it'll have put on a bunch of new growth, and it will be right back to its maniac blooming self come spring. So this is Lepanthesdsonii. Now do not let appearances fool you, because this plant does grow absolutely phenomenally well for me. It will not bloom. This is my fussiest. I think, again, it's a temperature related issue. Once I started getting cooler nights, it has gone back into starting to throw spikes again. It consistently throws spikes. It starts to develop a bud, and then it aborts the bud. It has done this for about a year now. So this, along with Gargoyle, it's going to go live in the tent again this winter. It's going to get cooler temps, and I'm going to see if I can get this very healthy, very beautiful Lepanthes to finally put out some awesome blooms for us. This is one that I have been dying to see for a very long time. This was one of my first Lepanthes. I got this with the Caladium and with the Helicocephala all at the same time, and it started my collection. So it would be really nice to see the flowers. Things would come full circle, to say the least. And yeah, so all the hard work would finally pay off. But that is my Lepanthesdsonii. Again, very healthy plant. It does have a nice subtle patterning on the leaf. The leaves are gently, slightly fuzzy, just like the Gargoyle is. And it is just awesome. So again, hopefully we'll see some blooms on this thing in a few months once it gets a little cooler. And I guess I only have one more Lepanthes to show you, but we're going to have to go to the rack because it is actually a larger one. It grows in my tent. The only one I have growing in my tent. So here we go. So last but not least, we have my Lepanthes Ariculada. This is a rather large Lepanthes, as you can see. It has big growths, and it has done really well. I remounted this. It came on a stick mount from Andes. It's pushed on these two growths since I've mounted it, and one of them is throwing its first spike. This is another one that is almost always in bloom. I don't know if you can see that or not, but that is a nice yellow and red flower. It's got two growths right now that are just trade off. Just every other day they're opening a new bloom. So, really nice yellow and red flowers. I did manage to pull a keiki off of this plant, and it is doing really well. This actually grows in my tank right now. And this keiki is forming 2 new growths of its own and some roots as well. So it's going to live, it's going to do really well. I'll probably pass this on to somebody. I have somebody in mind, but I'm going to let this get healthier before I try to ship it through the mail. Having that said, this grows in more or less intermediate conditions, but it gets some more variation as far as heat and cool go in my tent. It goes up to about 80, and this will go down in the winter time to the high 50s, 57 or 58 degrees in my tent. I do that mainly for some of my winter resters, but I do have some cooler growers in there now that are really going to appreciate the cooler temps. So if you're ever looking for a larger Lepanthes species, one that can grow a little bit less montane, a little bit lower humidity levels, and be bigger, bolder, and more fun to look at for some of you guys who do not like miniatures, then this is your one. They have a few other species that get larger like this. I'm always on the hunt for them, but have issues finding them sometimes. But this is a really nice plant. That is Lepanthes Ariculada, and this is the last one we will be looking at today. So let me get us spun around, look at something prettier, and we will sign off. So that does wrap up my video for today, guys. I do hope you enjoyed it. These are all my Lepanthes, a bit about how I take care of them and the progress that I've had this season. Do not be scared of these plants, guys. It is so easy to create a microclimate or an environment for these, and they really are a lot easier to grow than you may think. They're lovely plants, not for everybody, I know that, but I do love them, and I highly encourage people to get into these. They are very floriferous and rewarding plants to grow, and with a little bit of tweaks to some of the maybe watering schedules, fertilizing schedules, and humidity levels, you can easily grow these plants again. Really neat plants. I hope you enjoyed, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. I do appreciate it. And until next time, happy growing and stay safe. Jesus Christ. Oh my God. I'm gonna kill all of them before you see the rest of them. How about that?